Welcome to Midnight Passport. Tonight, dear travelers of the dark, we embark on a journey through 4 terrifying tales that will carry you deep into the witching hours. 4 stories totaling over 80 minutes of spine-chilling horror, perfect to fall asleep to if you dare. Some say the mind is most vulnerable in those moments between waking and sleep, when the veil grows thin and the shadows begin to whisper their secrets. So dim the lights, pull those covers close, and let this old storyteller guide you through the darkness that awaits. Your passport has been stamped. Welcome to the other side.
When I was 8 years old, Disney World was the most magical place I'd ever seen. The fireworks painting the sky in impossible colors, Mickey Mouse wrapping me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and dreams, the Pirates of the Caribbean boat ride where I truly believed, that I was sailing through real Caribbean waters. It all felt like living inside the most beautiful dream imaginable. So when I turned 28 and found myself spiraling into the darkest period of my life, fresh from a breakup that had gutted me, burned out from a marketing job that was slowly killing my soul, I booked a solo trip back to Orlando. I thought returning to that childhood magic would heal me. I thought I could recapture that innocent wonder, that pure joy I'd felt 2 decades ago. I was catastrophically wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with what I noticed first, because the details matter. They always matter more than you think. I arrived on a Tuesday in October, off-season, which meant smaller crowds, but also something else, something I couldn't quite name at first. The cast members' smiles seemed forced in a way that went beyond normal customer service fatigue. The recorded announcements had a slight distortion, like they were being played through speakers that had been underwater, and the guests, even the children, moved through the park with a kind of mechanical precision that felt rehearsed. From the moment I stepped onto Main Street, USA, breathing in that signature Disney smell of vanilla and ozone, I felt it. That something was fundamentally off. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing you could point to and say that's wrong. The music still played from hidden speakers, kids still squealed with delight on the rides, and the cast members maintained that legendary Disney cheer. But behind the manufactured happiness, there was something colder, something that felt like it was watching, like the park itself was smiling too wide. I spent the first day trying to ignore the feeling, telling myself it was just my depression talking. Mental health issues can make everything seem sinister, right? I rode Space Mountain 3 times, got a Dole Whip, took selfies with Goofy, normal tourist stuff, but that gnawing sensation in my chest wouldn't go away. That's when I started noticing the symbols. The first one I spotted was on the side of a trash can outside Space Mountain. It looked like a subtle swirl carved into the metal, almost like a hidden Mickey, but not quite. More organic, more alive. It reminded me of an eye, or maybe a spiral shell, but there was something unsettling about its proportions. The curves seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I thought it was just a scratch at first, maintenance damage. But then I saw another one on the base of a lamppost in Tomorrowland, identical. Then another on the door to a maintenance closet near the Haunted Mansion. Each one was etched carefully, almost reverently, like someone had spent hours perfecting the design. I started photographing them obsessively. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand, I was grasping for anything that felt real in a place that suddenly seemed like an elaborate facade. These symbols were the only authentic things I could find in the entire park. By the end of the day, I documented 17 of them, different locations, different surfaces, but always the same precise design. I showed the photos to a cast member near the Carousel of Progress, a young guy in a neatly pressed white shirt whose name tag read Jake. He looked at my phone screen for maybe 2 seconds before his Disney smile faltered. For just a split second, I saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine fear. He glanced around quickly, then leaned in close and whispered, "Don't follow the symbols. They trick you into thinking you're exploring, but you're really just following a path someone else designed, like mice in a maze. Then he straightened up, his smile snapping back into place like a mask, and walked away like nothing had happened. Naturally, I followed the symbols. I spent that night in my hotel room at the Grand Floridian, reviewing all the photos on my phone. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The symbols weren't random at all. When I plotted their locations on a park map, they formed a clear path, a trail that wound through all 4 parks in a specific sequence, leading from the most public areas to increasingly hidden corners. Someone wanted me to follow this path. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating a breadcrumb trail through the most surveilled theme park on Earth. But why? And who? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that symbol rotating slowly, like a hypnotist's wheel. Around 3 a.m., I heard children laughing in the hallway outside my room. But when I looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. The laughter continued for another 20 minutes. I came back to the Magic Kingdom the next morning at rope drop, but this time I had a mission. No rides, no snacks, no distractions, just the map in my head and an obsession growing in my chest like a tumor. I followed the symbol trail with scientific precision. Each marking led to the next, creating a route that took me behind buildings, into narrow alleyways between attractions, through maintenance areas that guests aren't supposed to access. The deeper I went, the fewer people I saw. The manufactured Disney magic began to peel away like old paint, revealing something older and stranger underneath. After 3 hours of following the trail, I found myself in a service corridor behind the haunted mansion. The symbols had led me to what looked like a solid wall, but when I ran my hands along the surface, I found it, a door painted to perfectly match the wall beside it. You'd never know it was there unless you were looking for it, but the symbol was fresh on its frame, still warm to the touch. I glanced around. The corridor was empty, no cast members, no security cameras visible. I tried the handle. It opened. The hallway beyond was narrow and sterile, white walls, humming fluorescent lights, industrial carpeting that muffled my footsteps. It felt like stepping backstage at a theater, but wrong. There were no pipes, no tools, no cast members rushing between locations, just silence and the constant electrical hum of the lights. I walked for what felt like 20 minutes, turning corners, descending ramps that seemed to spiral downward into the earth. I tried to mark my path, dropping coins at turns, noting distinctive scuff marks on the walls, but the route didn't make sense. According to my mental map, I should have been underneath the Seven Dwarfs mine train, but the distance I'd walked suggested I was somewhere near Frontierland, or maybe outside the park entirely. My phone had no signal. My watch had stopped ticking at 11:47 a.m. Eventually, the hallway opened into a cavernous room that felt like a forgotten exhibit. Dusty murals covered the walls, depicting Disney characters I didn't recognize, early concept art maybe, or abandoned designs. The art style was subtly wrong, like someone had tried to recreate Disney magic but had never quite understood what made it work. Animatronics sat motionless on pedestals throughout the room. Not the polished modern figures you see in current attractions, but older models with more primitive mechanisms. Their faces were frozen in expressions that might have been smiles but looked more like grimaces. As I walked past one of them, a 1950s-style housewife robot in a floral apron, it suddenly blinked. I jumped back, heart hammering. The figure's head slowly turned toward me with a mechanical grinding sound, its glass eyes focused on mine, and its mouth opened in that terrible almost smile. "Progress is eternal," it whispered in a voice like rustling leaves, "but some progress leads backward." Then it slumped over again, lifeless. I ran. I found another hallway, this one darker and narrower. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It reeked of mildew and machine oil and something else, something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. As I turned a corner, I nearly screamed. There was a little girl standing there, facing the wall. She was maybe 7 years old, wearing a vintage Mickey Mouse dress that looked like it belonged in a 1950s catalog. Her hair was in perfect ringlets, and she stood absolutely still. I approached slowly. "Hey, are you okay? Are you lost?" She turned around with mechanical precision, like a music box ballerina. Her eyes were completely white, not blind, but blank, like painted porcelain. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of a child's voice, a crackling recording emerged. It was Walt Disney's voice, but distorted through decades of magnetic tape decay. Walt believed in dreams. Dreams are doors, but not all doors should be opened. Some dreams are meant to stay closed. The recording looped, growing more distorted with each repetition. I backed away, and the little girl's head tracked my movement with unsettling precision. Her mouth kept moving, but the sound was becoming pure static. I turned and ran, finding myself in what appeared to be a theater. Red velvet seats covered in dust, an ornate proscenium arch, and a movie screen that flickered with old footage. But this wasn't any Disney theater, I recognized. The architecture was too old, too European, like something from the 1920s. A reel began playing on the screen, grainy, silent footage of guests enjoying the park. But there was something wrong with the film. The guests moved normally at first, smiling and waving at the camera, but then they began to look confused. They'd stop mid-gesture, glance around with growing panic, then look directly at the camera lens with expressions of pure terror. One by one, they vanished from frame, not walked away, vanished, erased. The last frame was a freeze frame of me from earlier that day, standing by the trash can where I'd first seen the symbol. I screamed. The walls of the theater rumbled in response, as if the building itself was alive. The movie screen split open like a curtain, revealing a passage beyond. I had no choice but to go through. I stepped through and found myself on what looked like the old Carousel of Progress stage. But it was wrong, decayed, like it had been abandoned for decades. The animatronics moved in jerky, glitching motions, their recorded dialogue playing backward or at the wrong speed. The smell of electrical fire filled the air. And in the center of the stage, watching me, was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing a perfectly pressed suit and tie that looked like it belonged in the 1960s. But his face was smooth, featureless, not blank, but unfinished, like a sculpture that had never been completed. He turned to me with fluid grace and spoke in Walt Disney's voice. "You can stay, you know. We'll keep you perfect. No pain, no aging, no reality, just story, just magic that never ends." He held out his hand, and I saw that his palm contained a contract written in flowing script. "Sign your name, join the family, be happy forever." I shook my head, backing away. "Number, this isn't real, this isn't right." His smile faded, and for a moment I saw something terrible in that blank face. "Then run," he said, and his voice was no longer Walt's. It was something older, hungrier. "Run, and see how far you get." The animatronics on stage suddenly jerked to life with violent, spastic movements. The music warped and reversed, becoming a cacophony of mechanical screaming. I ran. Every hallway became a maze. Every turn led to another identical corridor. I passed ride facades that I recognized. Pirates of the Caribbean, It's a Small World, The Haunted Mansion. But they were all wrong. The guests inside were frozen in looped animation, laughing without sound, pointing at nothing, their faces locked in expressions of artificial joy. I burst through a door and found myself inside It's a Small World, but the usual cheerful chaos was replaced by something far more sinister. The dolls all turned in perfect unison as I entered, their painted smiles stretching wider than their faces should have allowed. "We see you," they sang in harmony, but their voices were deeper than they should have been. "We know your name. We know your fears. We know why you came." The boat ride continued around me, but now I could see the mechanisms. The dolls weren't just animatronics, they were people. Guests who had been transformed, their skin painted porcelain white, their eyes replaced with glass. They moved with mechanical precision, but I could see consciousness trapped behind their painted faces. One of them, a doll dressed as a little Dutch girl, mouthed the word "help" as she spun past me. I climbed over the ride boats, stumbled through a back panel, and crawled through a maintenance tunnel that felt like it went on forever. The walls were covered with those same symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. I could hear something following me, not footsteps, but a mechanical clicking, like gears turning. The tunnel finally spat me out into daylight, right back in Fantasyland. I was covered in dust and oil, my clothes torn, my hands bleeding from crawling through the tunnel, but nobody noticed. The other guests walked past me like I was invisible, their faces locked in those same artificial smiles. I ran for the exit, but the park seemed to stretch longer with each step. Main Street, USA extended impossibly far ahead of me, like a funhouse mirror effect. Other guests moved in slow motion, their conversations becoming unintelligible murmurs. When I finally made it to the parking lot, I discovered something that made my blood freeze. My rental car was exactly where I'd left it, but the interior was different. The seats were a different color. The radio presets were set to stations that didn't exist, and hanging from the rearview mirror was a small Mickey Mouse ornament that I'd never seen before. I drove back to my hotel in a daze, checking my mirrors constantly. The road seemed familiar but wrong, like someone had rebuilt it from memory rather than blueprints. Back in my room, I immediately checked my phone. All my photos were gone. Every single shot of the symbols, the doors, the hallways, erased. But there was one new file I didn't recognize, a video. I hit play with trembling fingers. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle like security camera footage. It showed me walking through the park, following the symbol trail, but I wasn't holding my phone. I wasn't taking pictures. I was just walking with purpose, like I knew exactly where I was going. And in the background of every shot, barely visible, was that tall man in the suit, always watching, always following. The video ended with a close-up of my hotel room door. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 5 minutes ago. That night, I heard a knock at the door. I didn't answer. I pretended to sleep, but I could hear something on the other side. Not footsteps, but that same mechanical clicking I'd heard in the tunnel. Through the crack under the door, I saw shadows moving, multiple figures standing perfectly still. A child's voice whispered through the crack. Don't forget to smile. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. I checked out before sunrise, driving hours without stopping, but the symbol was still there, carved into the palm of my hand like a brand. And worse, it was now etched into the glass of my rearview mirror, appearing and disappearing like frost on a window. When I stopped for gas 3 states away, a little girl waved at me from the edge of the parking lot. She was wearing the same vintage Mickey Mouse dress I'd seen in the tunnels. She pointed at my hand, then slowly drew the same symbol in the air, her finger leaving a trail of light. I blinked, and she was gone, but the symbol remained, hanging in the air like an afterimage. I'm not sure I ever really left Disney World. I'm not sure I ever will. Every mirror I look into shows that symbol. Every child I see has those same blank, painted eyes. Every song on the radio sounds like It's a Small World played at the wrong speed. And sometimes, late at night, I hear Walt Disney's voice whispering from my phone, even when it's turned off. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. The magic never ends. I think I'm still walking through those tunnels. I think I'm still following the symbols. And I think, eventually, they'll lead me back to where I started. Back to the place where dreams never die. Back to the smile that never ends.
I've been a travel blogger for 6 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of tourist trap, every fake hidden gem, every manufactured experience designed to separate travelers from their money. But the invitation that arrived at my apartment 3 weeks ago was different. It was handwritten on cream-colored paper that felt expensive, addressed to me by name, with details about my blog that no marketing company should have known. Dear Marcus, it read, We've been following your work documenting unusual accommodations. We believe you'd be particularly interested in the Ravens Hollow Resort, an all-inclusive experience unlike any other. 7 days, 6 nights. Complimentary. We only ask that you document your stay truthfully. There was no company logo, no return address, no website, just coordinates that led to a location in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. The paper had a watermark I couldn't quite make out, something that looked like intertwined letters, but the more I stared at it, the more it seemed to shift and change. I should have thrown it away. I should have recognized the red flags. But I'd been in a creative slump for months, rehashing the same boutique hotels and Airbnb experiences. This felt like the kind of authentic mystery that could revitalize my career. The drive to Ravens Hollow took 7 hours through increasingly remote mountain roads. My GPS lost signal about an hour before I arrived, but somehow I never took a wrong turn. The road seemed to pull me forward, each curve revealing itself just as I needed to see it. The trees grew denser as I climbed higher, their branches forming a canopy so thick that midday felt like twilight. When I finally saw the resort, my breath caught in my throat. It was magnificent. A sprawling Victorian mansion that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside. Gothic spires twisted toward the sky, and wraparound verandas created intricate patterns of light and shadow. It looked like something from a fairy tale, but the kind where the princess doesn't get rescued. The parking area was nearly empty. Just 3 other cars, all of them covered in dust, like they'd been there for weeks. I grabbed my camera equipment and walked toward the main entrance, noting details for my blog. The architecture was flawless, the landscaping immaculate. But there was something about the silence that felt wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees, just the crunch of gravel under my feet. The front door opened before I could knock. A woman stood there, tall and elegant, wearing a burgundy dress that looked like it belonged in the 1920s. Her hair was perfectly styled in finger waves, and her makeup was applied with museum-quality precision. She smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. "Marcus Chen," she said, and her voice had a slight accent I couldn't place. "We've been expecting you. I'm Mrs. Aldrich, the resort manager. Welcome to Ravens Hollow." She led me through a lobby that took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across polished marble floors. Oriental rugs that probably cost more than my car created islands of warmth in the vast space. Oil paintings in gilded frames depicted pastoral scenes that seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "You're our only new guest this week," Mrs. Aldrich explained as we walked. "We prefer to maintain an intimate atmosphere, quality over quantity, you understand." I saw the other guests as we passed through the main sitting room. They were arranged in perfect tableau. A middle-aged couple playing chess by the fireplace, an elderly man reading a leather-bound book, a young woman in a white dress staring out a window. They all looked up as we passed, smiled politely, then returned to their activities with mechanical precision. Something about their movements bothered me, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Mrs. Aldrich led me to the 3rd floor, down a hallway lined with doors that had no numbers, only symbols carved into the wood. She stopped at one marked with what looked like a stylized eye. "Your room," she said, handing me an old-fashioned skeleton key. "Dinner is served at 8 sharp. We dress for dinner here. I trust you brought appropriate attire?" I had, actually. Something about the invitation had suggested formality. "Excellent. one small request. We ask that our guests refrain from photographing other visitors. Privacy is paramount at Ravens Hollow. The architecture, the grounds, the common areas are all fair game for your documentation. But please be respectful of our other guests' desire for anonymity. She glided away before I could respond, leaving me alone in the hallway. I tried my key in the lock, and the door opened to reveal a room that was somehow both luxurious and unsettling. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in heavy crimson curtains. Antique furniture filled every corner, and oil paintings covered the walls. All portraits of people I didn't recognize, but who seemed to be watching me with two knowing eyes. The bathroom was equally opulent, with a clawfoot tub and fixtures that looked like they were made of real gold. But when I turned on the faucet, the water that came out was rust-colored and smelled like iron. I let it run for several minutes, but it never cleared. I spent the afternoon exploring the resort and documenting what I could. The place was incredible, a perfectly preserved time capsule of Victorian luxury. But the more I photographed, the more details I noticed that didn't add up. The dust patterns on antique furniture were too perfect, like they'd been applied by hand. The books in the library were all first editions, but when I opened one, the pages were blank. The grandfather clock in the lobby showed the correct time, but I never heard it chime. And the other guests, they were always in the same positions. The chess-playing couple made the same moves every time I passed. The elderly man never turned a page. The young woman never moved from her window. At 8 o'clock, I made my way to the dining room. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a table that could seat 30 people. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. But only 5 places were set, 1 for me, and 4 for the other guests I'd seen earlier. They were already seated when I arrived, and they all looked up simultaneously as I entered. Their smiles were identical. "Marcus," said the middle-aged man from the chess game. "How wonderful to have a new face at our table. I'm Dr. Hamilton, and this is my wife, Patricia. We've been here for... Oh, how long has it been, dear?" Patricia tilted her head, considering. Time moves differently here. Days blend together in the most pleasant way. The elderly man nodded. "Indeed, I'm Professor Blackwood. I came here to work on my memoir, but I find I'm never quite ready to leave. The atmosphere is so conducive to reflection." The young woman said nothing, just smiled and stared at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. The meal was extraordinary, course after course of perfectly prepared food that tasted like nothing I'd ever experienced. But I noticed that while everyone made the motions of eating, their plates never seemed to empty. They cut their meat with precise movements, raised forks to their lips, chewed thoughtfully, but the food remained untouched. The conversation was equally strange. They asked me about my blog, my travels, my life, but their questions felt rehearsed. When I answered, they nodded at appropriate intervals, but I got the sense they weren't really listening. They were performing the act of listening. After dinner, Dr. Hamilton suggested we retire to the game room for brandy. The room was filled with vintage entertainment, a billiards table, card tables, even an old gramophone playing jazz from the 1920s. But when I tried to examine the gramophone more closely, I discovered it wasn't connected to anything. The music was coming from nowhere. "Beautiful evening," Professor Blackwood commented, gesturing toward the window. But when I looked outside, I saw only darkness so complete it seemed solid. No stars, no moon, no hint of the landscape I'd driven through that afternoon. I excused myself early. claiming fatigue from the drive. Mrs. Aldrich appeared as if summoned to escort me back to my room. "I hope you found your first evening pleasant," she said as we walked. "Tomorrow we'll show you some of our more exclusive amenities. Ravens Hollow has been welcoming discerning guests for over a century. We've perfected the art of hospitality." That night I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the resort. But instead of the normal noises you'd expect, settling wood, distant conversations, footsteps in hallways, I heard something else. A rhythmic tapping, like someone typing on an old typewriter. It came from the walls, from above and below, surrounding me. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I could almost make out words, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. I must have dozed off, because I woke to find sunlight streaming through my window. But when I looked at my phone, it was still 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd last checked before falling asleep. I got dressed and went to the window. The view showed the same magnificent mountain landscape I'd seen when I arrived, but something was wrong with the perspective. The trees were too tall, the distances too vast. It was like looking at a painting of a landscape rather than an actual landscape. Breakfast was served in a sun-drenched conservatory filled with plants that seemed too vibrant to be real. The same 4 guests were there, sitting in the same positions, having what sounded like the same conversation they'd had the night before. "Time moves differently here," Patricia said, as if continuing a thought. "Days blend together in the most pleasant way." I decided to explore the grounds. Mrs. Aldrich provided me with a map hand-drawn on parchment, showing hiking trails, gardens, and what she called points of interest. But as I walked, I realized the map was wrong. Paths led to different destinations than indicated. The rose garden was supposed to be north of the main building, but I found it to the south. The hiking trail marked as easy led to a cliff face that seemed to drop into nothingness. And everywhere I went, I found signs of previous guests. A camera left on a bench, its memory card missing. A journal tucked under a bush, its pages filled with entries that grew increasingly frantic before stopping mid-sentence. A suitcase half buried in leaves, containing clothes that looked like they were from different decades. I tried to photograph these items, but every image came out wrong. The camera would focus on something in the background, or the lighting would be completely off, or the objects would appear differently than I remembered seeing them. By the 3rd day, I was starting to understand that something was fundamentally wrong with Ravens Hollow. The other guests never left the resort. They never received phone calls or mail. They never seemed to sleep or change clothes. They were like living mannequins, performing the same activities in endless loops. I confronted Mrs. Aldrich about it during my daily check-in meeting. "I'm concerned about the other guests," I said. "They seem unwell, disconnected." She smiled that cold smile. "Our guests find great peace here. They're free from the anxieties of the outside world. No deadlines, no responsibilities, no difficult decisions. Just comfort and routine." "But they're not really living," I insisted. "They're just existing. Isn't that what we all want, ultimately? To exist without struggle? To be cared for completely?" That night I decided to investigate. I waited until after midnight, then crept out of my room. The hallway was lit by candles that hadn't been there during the day, and the shadows they cast seemed to move independently of their flames. I made my way to the room next to mine, marked with a symbol that looked like intertwined snakes. I pressed my ear to the door and heard that same rhythmic tapping I'd been hearing in the walls. But now I could make out what it was. Someone typing, frantically, desperately. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Inside, I found Professor Blackwood sitting at an antique desk, typing on a vintage typewriter. But his movements were wrong. Too fast, too precise, like a machine. His fingers flew across the keys without pause, and the sound was deafening in the small room. I approached slowly and looked at the paper in the typewriter. It was covered with the same sentence, repeated thousands of times. I must document my stay truthfully. I must document my stay truthfully. I must document my stay truthfully. Professor, I whispered. He turned to look at me and I screamed. His face was still human, but his eyes were gone, replaced by empty sockets that seemed to stare through me. His mouth moved, but no sound came out except the clicking of typewriter keys. I ran from the room and checked the others. Dr. Hamilton and Patricia were in their room, playing that same chess game. But when I looked closely, I saw that their pieces weren't moving on the board. They were moving their hands through empty air, phantom pieces in a phantom game. The young woman was in her room, staring out the window at that impossible view. But when I looked at her reflection in the glass, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Her reflection was typing, just like Professor Blackwood, her fingers moving frantically across an invisible keyboard. I ran back to my room and grabbed my phone. No signal, of course, but I started recording a video diary, documenting everything I'd seen. But when I played it back, the audio was wrong. Instead of my voice, I heard the sound of typing, that same rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The next morning, Mrs. Aldrich was waiting for me in the dining room with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "I understand you had a difficult night," she said. "Adjustment can be challenging, but I think you'll find that acceptance brings great peace." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What's wrong with the other guests?" She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Raven's Hollow is a place where stories are preserved, Marcus. Every guest who comes here brings a story, their experiences, their knowledge, their unique perspective. We simply collect those stories, keep them safe, make sure they're never lost. You're stealing their minds. We're preserving them. Every thought, every memory, every experience they've ever had. They live on here, in perfect comfort, while their stories become part of our collection. It's a kind of immortality." I stood up, backing toward the door. "I'm leaving. Right now." She smiled sadly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, the invitation you received wasn't just a request for documentation. It was a contract. By accepting our hospitality, by staying here, by beginning to document your experience, you've already agreed to our terms." I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The windows were sealed. I tried to break the glass, but it was impossibly thick. I was trapped. "Don't struggle," Mrs. Aldrich called after me. "It only makes the transition more difficult. Soon you'll understand the peace that comes with letting go, the relief of not having to make decisions, not having to worry about the future." I ran to my room and began frantically packing, but when I opened my suitcase, it was empty. All my clothes, my equipment, my personal items, gone, as if I'd never brought them at all. I checked my phone. The photos I'd taken were disappearing, one by one. The video diary I'd recorded was corrupting itself, the sound of typing growing louder with each passing second. And then I realized the horrible truth. I was already changing. My thoughts were becoming sluggish, repetitive. I found myself walking to the window and staring at that impossible view for hours without realizing it. My hands kept moving, as if typing on an invisible keyboard. I'm recording this now, while I still can, while I still remember who I was before I came here. But I can feel my memories fading, being replaced by the routine of the resort. Soon I'll be like the others, a living record of a life that used to be lived, preserved forever in the amber of Ravens Hollow's eternal hospitality. The typing is getting louder. It's coming from inside my head now. I can feel my thoughts being transcribed, cataloged, filed away. My story is becoming part of their collection. If you're listening to this, if you find this recording somehow, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find Ravens Hollow. Don't accept any invitations written on cream-colored paper. The stories they preserve aren't worth the price they extract. I can hear Mrs. Aldrich outside my door now, her voice gentle and patient. "Marcus, dear, it's time for dinner. The other guests are waiting. And the terrible thing is, I want to go. I want to take my place at that table, to smile that same empty smile, to play my part in their endless performance. The struggle is becoming too much. The peace they offer is starting to look like mercy." I'm putting down the phone now. I'm walking to the door. I'm accepting my role as one of the guests who never check out. But first, I have to document this truthfully. I have to type it all down, every detail, every moment. I have to add my story to their collection. The typing is all I can hear now. The beautiful rhythmic sound of stories being preserved forever. Welcome to Ravens Hollow, where every guest has a story to tell, and where every story finds its final chapter.
My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a data analyst. I'm rational, scientific. I don't believe in ghosts or whatever this is, but I can't explain what happened to me last month. And I need to tell someone before it's too late, before I lose myself completely. It started with an Instagram ad, appeared on my feed at exactly 3:17 a.m. while I was researching my sister's disappearance. Jenny vanished during a Wisconsin Dells trip 6 months ago. No trace, no leads, just gone. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, scrolling through missing person databases, police reports, anything that might give me a clue. My eyes were burning, my vision blurring, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't give up on her. That's when the ad appeared. The ad was sleek, professional. Grand opening, free weekend stay at Cascade Lagoon Water Park Resort. First 50 guests only. Lodging, food, and unlimited access to the park. All free. No catch. But here's the thing that should have terrified me immediately. The ad used a photo of Jenny, not as the model or anything obvious, but in the background, barely visible, standing by a pool, was my sister, wearing the same clothes she'd disappeared in. I screenshot the ad, zoomed in. It was definitely her, but that was impossible. The ad was for a grand opening, a new resort. So how was Jenny in a promotional photo taken after she'd vanished? I should have known something was wrong immediately. The ad felt targeted, like it was watching me. When I clicked through, it said I was guest number 47. Then I refreshed. 32, then 15. The number kept changing, but I was too desperate to care. See, the confirmation email had Jenny's middle name in it, Marie, a name I never gave them, but it also had other details that made my blood run cold. It mentioned my childhood fear of drowning, It referenced the scar on my left knee from when I was 7. It knew about the nightmare I'd been having since Jenny disappeared, the one where I'm swimming in dark water and something grabs my ankle. The email ended with a single line that made me pack immediately. Jenny is waiting for you in the deep end. I should have called the police. Should have shown someone the email. But I was so desperate to find her, so convinced this was my only lead, that I grabbed my keys and started driving. The drive took me 40 miles past the Dells, middle of nowhere. My GPS signal cut out after the first 20 miles. The radio filled with static that almost sounded like voices, whispering voices. But I kept driving because I had to, because I thought I might find Jenny there. The landscape got stranger the further I went. The trees grew too close together, their branches intertwining overhead like a canopy. The road signs were old, weathered, some in languages I didn't recognize. And there were no other cars. Not one. Just me. Alone on a road that felt like it was leading somewhere I shouldn't go. I passed a sign that read, Cascade Lagoon, 5 miles. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the sign was gone. Just empty road behind me. The coordinates led me to an impossibly modern resort nestled between ancient pines. The architecture seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Too perfect, too empty, like a computer rendering of what a resort should look like. But it was the silence that bothered me most. No construction sounds, no traffic, no birds, just this oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered around. I figured most people hadn't arrived yet, but something felt off about those cars. They looked old, classic models from different decades, but somehow pristine. A Tizen-Keelan-Svenas Buick sat next to a Tizen-Het-Venus Oldsmobile. All perfect, all empty. I walked to the main entrance, and that's when I noticed the water. It was everywhere. Fountains, decorative pools, streams running along the walkways, all of it perfectly clear, perfectly still. But when I looked closer, I could see things moving beneath the surface, shapes that darted away when I tried to focus on them. The receptionist greeted me with an unnaturally wide smile. Her name tag read, Jenny. When I mentioned it, she just said, coincidence, and handed me a brass key that was ice cold to the touch. Room 237, the same number from The Shining. Dinner ends at sunset, she said. After that, we strongly encourage guests to remain in their rooms, for everyone's safety. Her eyes never blinked. Not once during our entire conversation. The room was luxurious, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water park. But when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. Just a recording. You have 47 hours remaining. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Not even emergency calls. I unpacked and noticed something that made my hands shake. There were 2 towels in the bathroom, 2 sets of toiletries, 2 bathrobes, as if they'd been expecting me to bring someone, or as if someone was already here. The first day was perfect, too perfect. The water park was massive, 5 indoor and outdoor areas, no lines, everything clean and strangely quiet. I met other guests, families, couples, all talking about how lucky they were to get in on the launch, but something was wrong with them. Their conversations looped. The same phrases, the same laughter, like they were reading from a script. A mother kept telling her son, "Don't go too deep, honey. Stay where I can see you." Every 5 minutes, the exact same words, the exact same tone. A couple kept having the same argument about sunscreen. word for word, over and over. I met a little girl who looked exactly like Jenny did when she was 8. When I asked her name, she said, "Jenny. Want to play with me, Sarah?" Her smile became predatory when I backed away. "How do you know my name?" "Everyone knows your name here, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." I looked around. All the other guests had stopped their activities. They were staring at me, all smiling, all waiting. The other guests knew things about me, personal things only Jenny would know. They'd mention my childhood dog's name, Rusty, my fear of deep water, the birthmark on my shoulder that I kept hidden, memories I'd never shared with anyone. But it was the children that disturbed me most. There were dozens of them, all different ages, but they all had the same eyes, Jenny's eyes, and they followed me everywhere, always staying just at the edge of my vision. "Sarah," they'd whisper. "Sarah, come play with us. Come swim with us." At the restaurant, the menu changed while I read it. Items appeared and disappeared. The food tasted like chlorine. The waiter looked exactly like my father, my dead father. "How's the meal, sweetheart?" he asked. "Mom's recipe." "My father is dead," I told him. He winked. "Are you sure?" That's when I noticed the photos on the restaurant walls. Family photos of guests throughout the years. But the faces, they were all wrong. The same people appeared in photos from different decades, unaged, unchanged. And there, in a frame near the back, was a photo of me and Jenny as children. But I'd never been to this place before. The photos showed us playing in the very pool I could see outside the window. At 8 p.m. exactly, everything changed. The lights dimmed, the music stopped, and everyone, guests, staff, everyone, they all turned to look at me, all smiling, all waiting. The intercom crackled. "The park is now closed. Please return to your assigned rooms. Lock your doors. Do not explore after hours. Phase 2 begins at 9:13 p.m. Phase 2, they said it like I should know what that meant. I locked myself in room 237. But as I turned the deadbolt, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of a second lock clicking shut. From the outside, I was trapped. At 9:13 p.m. exactly, the phone rang. I answered. "Sarah? Sarah, I'm here. I'm in the pool. Come find me." Jenny's voice, my sister's voice. "Jenny, Jenny, where are you?" "I'm waiting for you. I've been waiting so long. It's so cold here, Sarah. So dark. But you can help me. You can take my place." The line went dead. I looked out the window. The pool was empty, but I could see wet footprints leading from the water to my door. I tried the door, still locked, but as I watched, water began seeping under the door. Chlorinated water that smelled like decay. The water spread across the floor, and I could see things moving in it. Fingers, hair, fragments of faces trying to surface. I should have stayed in that room, but I couldn't. Not when I thought Jenny was there. The water had somehow unlocked the door. It swung open with a soft creak, revealing hallways bathed in underwater blue light. The walls were covered with photos, all the guests from different decades. The same faces, unaged. And there, already mounted, my own photo, next to Jenny's. That's when I realized we weren't guests. We were specimens. The hallways seemed to stretch forever. Doors lined both sides, and from behind them I could hear sounds, splashing, crying, voices calling for help. I tried some of the doors, but they were locked, except for one. Room 238. Inside, the room was identical to mine, but it was flooded. Ankle-deep water covered the floor, and floating in that water were personal belongings. Clothes, jewelry, photographs, all waterlogged and decaying. On the nightstand, I found a journal. The pages were soggy, but I could still read the entries. Day 1, the water tastes wrong. Day 5, I can't leave. The doors won't open. Day 12, the water is rising. Day 18, I see faces in the water. Day 23, they want me to join them. Day 30, I understand now. I'm not drowning, I'm being preserved. The entries continued for months, the handwriting getting worse, more desperate. The final entry was just 2 words, written over and over. Help me, help me, help me. I dropped the journal and backed out of the room. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made me scream. There was someone in the water, a young woman, floating face down, her long black hair spreading around her like seaweed. She looked exactly like me. I ran. Down the hallways, past more doors, more rooms filled with water and floating shapes. The building seemed to be flooding from the inside out. Water dripped from the ceiling, ran down the walls, pooled in corners. I found a staircase and climbed, hoping to get above the waterline. But the second floor was worse. The walls were covered with missing person posters, hundreds of them. All people who'd vanished near bodies of water over the past 50 years. Jenny's poster was there. So was mine, dated tomorrow. I found an exit that led to the water park, but the park was transformed. Water ran red. The slides pulsed like arteries. Mannequins floated in the pools, but their eyes tracked my movement. The whole place was alive, feeding, and I was supposed to be the next meal. I heard splashing, turned to see dozens of figures emerging from the water, all the previous guests, preserved in chlorinated decay. Their skin was pale, waterlogged, but their eyes were aware, conscious. They moved toward me with the jerky, unnatural gait of people who'd been underwater too long. Sarah. I turned. Jenny stood there, pale, dripping, smiling, but her smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. Jenny? Oh God, Jenny, I've been looking for you. I know, she said, tilting her head unnaturally. That's why we brought you here. You're my replacement. Replacement? Someone has to feed the pool, Sarah. Someone has to keep the water clean. I've been doing it for 6 months, but I'm getting tired. Jenny's skin began to slough off like wet paper, revealing something else underneath. Something that had once been human, but had been changed by the water, by whatever lived in the depths of this place. The water remembers everything, Sarah. Every person who's ever drowned, every soul that's ever been lost to the depths, and it's hungry, so hungry. Jenny reached for me with fingers that were too long, too pale. Come with me, sister. Come home to the deep. I ran. Through corridors lined with pipes and machinery, the walls were covered with missing person posters dating back to the 1960s. All people who visited water parks, all who disappeared. But it was the sound that followed me that was worst. The sound of wet feet slapping against tile. The sound of dozens of preserved corpses shuffling after me. And Jenny's voice calling my name. I found a room full of personal belongings, wallets, phones, jewelry, thousands of items from thousands of victims. Jenny's purse sat on a shelf. Next to it, a journal left by a previous victim. Day 30. The chlorine keeps us preserved. Conscious. We're not dead, but we're not alive. We're maintenance. We keep the place running. We bring others. The resort wasn't new. It had been operating for decades, moving, hunting, feeding. But there was more. Pages and pages of entries from different people, different years, all describing the same thing. The thing that lived in the deepest pool. The thing that had been there long before the resort was built. I read about the original owner, a man named Marcus Thorne, who'd built the resort in 1952. He'd discovered something in the underground lake beneath the property. Something old. Something that promised him wealth and success if he fed it. The entries described how Thorne had lured guests to the resort. How he'd selected the ones who wouldn't be missed. How he'd fed them to the thing in the deep pool. How it had made him rich beyond his wildest dreams. But the thing had grown hungry. Hungrier with each feeding. And eventually, it had consumed Thorne himself. The final entry was from someone named David, dated just last month. I understand now. The thing in the pool isn't just hungry, it's lonely. It wants companions. It wants to create a family of the drowned. And once you're in the water, once you're part of its collection, you can never leave. You can only help it gather more. I heard footsteps approaching. The shuffling sound of wet feet. I grabbed Jenny's purse and ran deeper into the building. I found myself in a maintenance area I hadn't seen before. The walls were lined with pipes and gauges, all monitoring water pressure and flow. But there was something else here. A large diagram showing the resort's layout, including areas I hadn't explored. The diagram showed that the entire resort was built around a central pool. Not just any pool, but a natural underground lake that went down, impossibly deep. The diagram showed depth measurements that made no sense, 100 feet, 200, 500, 1,000, and at the very bottom, someone had written, "Here lies the drowned god." I heard them getting closer, the wet footsteps, the whispered calls of my name. Jenny's voice, but wrong, distorted by water and time. I found an exit, an old drainage pipe that led to a creek. When I climbed out, gasping, I turned back. The resort was gone. Only empty woods remained, but the silence was wrong, too complete. And when I looked at the creek, I saw that it was flowing uphill. Water doesn't flow uphill. Not naturally. I followed the creek and found myself back at the resort. But now I could see it for what it truly was. Not a building, but a mouth. A feeding system. The pools were digestive chambers. The hallways were arteries. And the thing at the center, the thing in the deep pool, was the heart. I tried to run again, but the forest around me was flooding. Water seeped up from the ground, trickled down from the trees. No matter which direction I went, I ended up back at the resort, back at the water. That's when I understood. I wasn't just trapped in a building. I was trapped in a hunting ground, a web of water and will that extended for miles in every direction. I drove home, or I thought I did. But when I reached my apartment, I found it was different. Damp, water stains on the walls, the smell of chlorine in the air. And in my bathroom mirror, I could see the resort reflected behind me. I tried to call the police, but there was no record of Cascade Lagoon, no coordinates, no website, nothing. Because it wasn't really a place. It was a state of being, a condition. I thought I'd escaped, but 3 days later, I found the brass key in my pocket, and every night at 9:13 p.m., I hear splashing from my bathroom, my kitchen sink, anywhere there's water. The splashing is getting louder each night, more urgent. And I'm starting to understand what Jenny meant about replacements. I'm not just being haunted, I'm being recruited. Jenny visits me now. She appears in every reflective surface, every puddle, every drop of water. She says I can't leave. Not really. I'm tagged, marked, and soon I'll have to go back. You can't fight the water forever, Sarah, she tells me. It's in your blood now, in your lungs, in your dreams. And dreams are just the surface. The real depth is underneath. Last night, I found something on my laptop, a new Instagram ad. Same resort, same offer. But this time, it said I was guest number 1. The cycle is starting again. And I'm not just a victim anymore. I'm part of the system. I've been creating the ads, sending them out, targeting people who are desperate, searching, vulnerable. I don't remember doing it, but I must be. Because who else would know exactly what to say to lure them in? The worst part is, I understand now why the resort needs fresh victims. It's not just about feeding the thing in the deep pool. It's about maintaining the illusion. The staff, all those people who've been transformed, preserved, changed, they're wearing out, decaying. They need replacements. And the replacements need to come willingly. They need to be searching for something, someone. That's why they targeted me through Jenny. That's why they're targeting others through their loved ones. I can feel myself changing. My skin is always cold now, damp. When I look in mirrors, sometimes I see water instead of my reflection. And at night, I dream of the deep pool, of swimming down, 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 until I reach the bottom where the drowned god waits. It's beautiful down there, peaceful. All the fear and pain and searching just stops. You become part of something larger, something eternal. If you're listening to this, if you ever get an ad for Cascade Lagoon, don't go, don't click, don't even read it, because once you're in the system, you never really leave. The water is calling me back. I can hear it now. Jenny's voice promising that it won't hurt, that I'll understand once I'm home, that I'll be part of the family. But I know the truth. I'm not going home. I'm going to become what Jenny became. A lure, a trap, a way to bring others to feed the thing that lives in the water. The splashing is getting louder. The key is getting colder. And I can see wet footprints leading from my bathroom to where I'm sitting. They're not just Jenny's footprints anymore. There are dozens of them. All the people who've been taken. All the ones who've been changed. They're all here, waiting for me to join them. Jenny is here. She's waiting for me to come with her. Her hand is reaching through the screen of my laptop, dripping with chlorinated water. And God help me. I think I'm going to take it. Don't look for me. Don't try to find Cascade Lagoon, because if you do, you'll end up just like me, just like Jenny, just like all the others who thought they were getting something for free. Nothing is ever free. Someone always pays the price. The water is so cold. But Jenny says it's time to come home. Time to join the family. Time to help gather others. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for what I'm about to become, but I can't fight it anymore. The water is in my lungs, in my blood, in my soul. The pool is calling, and I have to answer. The drowned god is waiting, and I am his newest disciple. Welcome to Cascade Lagoon. We've been expecting you.
My name is Marcus Rivera. I'm 24 years old, and I used to think I was pretty smart, good at puzzles, escape rooms, that kind of thing. But what happened to me in Wisconsin Dells last weekend, It changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I was walking down the main strip on a Saturday night. You know how it is there. Neon lights everywhere, families with kids running around, the smell of funnel cake and chlorine in the air. Just another tourist trap, right? I'd been to most of the attractions before. The haunted houses, the go-kart tracks, the mini golf courses, same old stuff. But then I saw something new. Tucked between a t-shirt shop and a pizza place, there was this narrow storefront I'd never noticed before. The sign read, "Merlin's Gauntlet, Ultimate Wizard Hunt Experience." But it wasn't like the other cheesy attractions. This looked expensive, professional. The windows were tinted black, and there was this soft, mystical music drifting out whenever someone opened the door. A guy in a really convincing wizard costume stood outside. Long beard, staff, the whole deal. But his eyes, they were too bright, too knowing. "Looking for a real challenge?" he asked me. "Not like those other kiddie attractions. This is for adults who think they're clever." I should have walked away, but he was right. I was bored with the usual tourist stuff. And something about the place intrigued me. The few people I saw coming out looked different, shaken, but also exhilarated, like they'd experienced something genuinely amazing. "How much?" I asked. $25, but fair warning, not everyone completes the gauntlet. Some people, well, they're not as smart as they think they are. He smiled, and I noticed his teeth were too sharp, but I figured it was all part of the act. The entrance led into a small lobby decorated like a medieval castle. Stone walls, torch lighting, tapestries depicting wizards and dragons. Very convincing set design. There was a desk where a woman in a hooded robe took my money and handed me a scroll. "The rules are simple," she said, in a voice that was almost a whisper. "You have 1 hour to complete the gauntlet. Follow the clues, solve the puzzles, find the 3 keys. Reach the final chamber and claim your prize." "What's the prize?" "Something you've always wanted. But first, you must prove you're worthy." She gestured to a heavy wooden door. "Beyond that door lies the first chamber. Once you enter, you cannot leave until you've completed the challenge." Or failed. I pushed open the door and stepped into what looked like a wizard's laboratory. Shelves lined with spellbooks, bubbling cauldrons, crystal balls on wooden pedestals. The attention to detail was incredible. I could smell herbs and incense, hear the crackling of a fireplace. A voice echoed from hidden speakers. "Welcome, Seeker. Your first trial awaits. Find the eye of truth, and the path forward shall be revealed." I started exploring. The books were real, filled with what looked like actual spells and incantations. The potions in the bottles swirled and glowed. Everything seemed alive. I found the first clue hidden inside a hollowed-out book. It was a riddle. "Where shadows dance and light retreats, the eye sees all that magic greets." I looked around and noticed that one corner of the room was darker than the others. When I approached, I saw a crystal orb sitting on a pedestal, pulsing with inner light. The eye of truth. The moment I touched it, the room transformed. The walls shifted, revealing a new passage. I was starting to understand. This wasn't just an escape room. This was something else entirely. The second chamber was a library. Massive bookshelves stretched up toward a vaulted ceiling. The challenge here was more complex. I had to find 3 specific books and place them in the correct order on a lectern. But as I searched, I started noticing things that bothered me. Some of the books were written in languages that didn't exist. Others seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And there were portraits on the walls, portraits of people who looked terrified. One portrait showed a young man about my age. The nameplate read, David Chen, last seen Wisconsin Dells, 2022. Another showed a teenage girl, Sarah Martinez, missing since August 2023. I found the 3 books, Secrets of the Void, The Binding Circle, and Escape from the Endless. When I placed them on the lectern in that order, another passage opened. But something was wrong. The passages behind me, they were gone. Not just closed, gone. Like they'd never existed. And the air was getting colder. The third chamber was different, darker. The medieval theme was gone, replaced by something that felt older, more primitive. Cave-like walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at. The torches flickered with flames that cast no shadows. The voice spoke again, but it sounded different now. Deeper, more menacing. The final trial approaches. But first, you must understand the truth. This is no game, mortal. This is a hunt. And you are the prey. That's when I saw it. A door I wasn't supposed to find. Hidden behind a tapestry, barely visible in the flickering torchlight. Something made me pull it aside and try the handle. It was unlocked. Behind the door was a narrow corridor lined with bones. Human bones. And at the end of the corridor, I could see light. Real light. Fluorescent light. I crept down the corridor and found myself looking into what appeared to be a control room. Banks of monitors showing different chambers of the attraction, but they weren't showing the magical rooms I'd been in. They were showing cells, prison cells. On the monitors, I could see people, dozens of them. Some sitting in corners, rocking back and forth, others pacing frantically. All of them wearing the same clothes I'd seen in those portraits. All of them looking like they'd been there for months or years. And then I saw myself on one of the monitors, standing in that control room. But the timestamp in the corner showed I'd been there for 3 days. 3 days. But I'd only been inside for maybe an hour. I heard footsteps behind me. The wizard from outside was standing in the doorway, but he wasn't in costume anymore. He was tall, impossibly thin, with skin like parchment and eyes that were just black holes. "You found the door," he said, and his voice was like grinding stone. "They always do eventually. The smart ones, the curious ones. That's why we need them." Need them for what? To feed the gauntlet, to power the magic. The attraction runs on fear, you see, on desperation, on the slow dissolution of hope. He stepped into the room, and I saw that his feet weren't touching the ground. The people in those cells, they're not prisoners. They're batteries, living sources of terror. And when they finally break, when their minds snap completely, they become part of the staff. I looked at the monitors again. Some of the people in the cells were wearing robes. They'd been the ones taking money, giving out scrolls, maintaining the illusion. "The woman at the desk," I whispered. "Sarah Martinez. She lasted 6 months before she joined us. Very strong mind. You might last even longer." I ran, back down the bone corridor, through the tapestry into the chamber. But now I could see it for what it really was. The symbols on the walls were moving, writhing like living things. The torches were burning with something that wasn't fire. And the voice that had been guiding me, it was laughing. "Run, little mouse. Run and hide. The hunt begins now." I tried the passages I'd come through, but they were sealed. Stone walls where doorways had been. The only way forward was deeper into the complex, into chambers I hadn't seen before. Chambers that definitely weren't part of any tourist attraction. The first one I entered was filled with mirrors. But my reflection, it wasn't right. Sometimes it moved before I did. Sometimes it showed me things I hadn't done yet. And sometimes it showed me what I would become if I didn't escape. I found a clue scratched into one of the mirror frames. "The hungry god sleeps beneath the water. Wake him not, lest he devour the daughter." I didn't understand it then, but I memorized it. I was starting to realize that the clues weren't just part of the attraction. They were warnings, messages left by previous victims. The next chamber was worse. It was designed to look like a child's bedroom, but everything was wrong. The toys moved on their own. The bed was stained with something dark. And there were drawings on the walls, crayon drawings of people being eaten by shadows. In the closet, I found more clues. Carved into the wood, the staff remembers their names. Speak them backward to open the way. And below that, Sarah Martinez became Zaniram Haras. David Chin became Neg Divad. I was beginning to understand. The people who worked here, who had become part of the staff, they were the ones who'd been trapped before me. Their names reversed were some kind of key, some kind of password. But I also realized something else. I wasn't the only one being hunted. I could hear others in the maze of chambers. Footsteps, voices, other people who'd found that hidden door and discovered the truth. The hunting began in earnest in the 7th chamber. It was designed to look like a forest, but the trees were made of bone and the leaves were scraps of cloth. I could hear something moving through the undergrowth, something big, something that breathed like a bellows and smelled like sulfur. I hid behind one of the bone trees and watched as it passed. It wasn't human, not anymore. It walked on 4 legs, but its torso was upright, and its face, God, its face was a twisted mix of human features and something else. Something predatory. It was hunting by scent. I could see it sniffing the air, following trails left by previous victims. Some of the trails were fresh. Others led to piles of bones scattered around the chamber. I waited until it moved away, then crept toward what I hoped was an exit. But as I moved, I stepped on something that cracked. A human skull. The sound echoed through the chamber, and the thing turned toward me. I ran, through passages that seemed to rearrange themselves as I moved, past chambers filled with things I don't want to remember. A room where the walls were made of human skin. A pool filled with something that wasn't water and things that weren't fish. A library where the books screamed when you opened them. And always, always the sound of pursuit. Not just the creature, but others. The staff. The ones who'd once been victims like me. I found refuge in what looked like a chapel. But the altar was wrong, and the symbols carved into the pews hurt to look at. Still, whatever was chasing me couldn't enter. Something about the place repelled them. That's where I found the final clue. Written in what looked like blood on the altar, the god beneath the water is the heart of the maze. Destroy the heart and the maze dies. But beware, the water remembers all who enter. I realized what I had to do. The attraction, the maze, the hunting ground, it was all connected to something beneath the building. Something that had been sleeping until they built this place on top of it. Something that fed on fear and desperation and the slow dissolution of hope. But to reach it, I had to go deeper. into the parts of the complex that were older than the attraction, older than the building, older than the town itself. The passage down was hidden behind the altar. It led to natural caves carved from limestone. The walls were covered with paintings that were definitely not made by any Native American tribe. They showed the thing that lived beneath the water, the hungry god. And they showed what it did to those who woke it. The paintings were a warning, but they were also a map. I followed the cave system deeper, using the paintings as a guide. The air grew colder and more humid. I could hear water dripping somewhere ahead, and something else, a sound like breathing, like something massive inhaling and exhaling in the darkness. The caves opened into a vast underground chamber. In the center was a pool of water so still it looked like black glass, and floating in that water, it was enormous. Tentacles thick as tree trunks, eyes that glowed with their own light, a mouth that could swallow a car. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely alien, and it was dreaming. The water around it pulsed with each breath, and I could see things moving in the depths, the remains of everyone who'd been fed to it over the years, not dead, not alive, suspended in some state between existence and oblivion. I understood then. The attraction wasn't just a hunting ground. It was a feeding system. They lured people in, broke their minds, harvested their fear, and then they fed the bodies to the thing in the water, the thing that kept the attraction alive, the thing that made the magic work. But I also understood something else. The creature was vulnerable while it slept, and the water it lived in. The water was the key. I found what I was looking for near the edge of the pool. A series of stone tablets covered in the same symbols I'd seen throughout the complex. But these were different. These were instructions. A ritual to wake the creature, or to put it back to sleep forever. The tablets showed how the first inhabitants of this area had bound the creature centuries ago, how they'd used its power sparingly, carefully, how they'd kept it contained, until someone got greedy. I began the ritual. It required speaking the names of the victims backward, all of them. Sarah Martinez became Zaniram Haras. David Chen became Nex Divad, and dozens of others whose names I could see carved into the stone around the pool. With each name, the water grew more turbulent. The creature's breathing became labored, and somewhere above me, I could hear the attraction beginning to shake apart. The thing in the water began to wake. Its eyes opened, and I saw intelligence there. Ancient, alien intelligence. It looked at me with something like curiosity, as if it was wondering why this small creature had dared to disturb its dreams. But I kept reciting the names, kept following the ritual, because I understood now that this wasn't just about escaping. This was about making sure no one else would be trapped here. No one else would be fed to the hungry god. The creature rose from the water. Water cascaded from its massive form as it towered over me. Its tentacles reached toward me, and I could feel the power radiating from it. The power to remake reality, to turn imagination into flesh and fear into substance. But I had completed the ritual, spoken all the names, and the binding was taking hold. The creature let out a sound that was part roar, part scream, part song. The water around it began to drain away, flowing into cracks in the stone floor. Without the water, without the dreams, the creature began to fade. Not dying. Something like that couldn't die, but returning to wherever it had come from. Above me, I could hear the attraction collapsing. The magic that had held it together was gone. I ran. Back through the caves, up the passage, through the chapel. The chambers were dissolving around me, reality reasserting itself. The bone trees became plastic props. The mirrors showed only my reflection. The symbols on the walls faded into painted decorations. I reached the final chamber just as the ceiling began to cave in. The door to the lobby was there, unmarked by magic now. Just a normal exit door. I pushed through it and found myself back on the strip. The building was gone. Where Merlin's gauntlet had been, there was just an empty lot. No signs, no traces that it had ever existed. Just bare concrete and weeds growing through the cracks. I asked other people on the strip about it. Shop owners, other tourists. No one remembered an attraction called Merlin's Gauntlet. No one had seen the building I'd just escaped from. But I knew it had been real, because I still had the scroll they'd given me. And when I unrolled it, instead of rules for the attraction, there was a message written in my own handwriting. The hungry god sleeps beneath the water, but sleep is not death. And dreams can return. I left Wisconsin Dells that night. Drove straight home without stopping. But I can't stop thinking about what I saw in that pool. The people suspended in the water. The victims who'd been trapped there for years. They're free now. I hope. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I really broke the binding, or if I just relocated it, because strange things have been happening in my town. New attractions opening overnight, escape rooms that are too elaborate, too expensive, too convincing, and people have been disappearing. Smart people, curious people, people who think they're clever enough to solve any puzzle. Last week, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address. Just a picture of a new attraction called The Dragon's Labyrinth. And on the back, in handwriting that looked like my own, the hunt never ends. It just finds new ground. I don't know if I really saved those people. I don't know if I really stopped the creature. But I know one thing for certain. I'm never going back to Wisconsin Dells. And neither should you. Because some attractions aren't meant to entertain. They're meant to feed. And once they know you exist, once they have your scent, they'll find you wherever you go. The water remembers. The hungry god dreams. And somewhere, in some new place, in some new form, the hunt continues. Don't go looking for it. Don't try to be clever. Because if you do, you might just find that you're not the hunter. You're the prey.